Happy New Year. You're too far away. That's a bit better. Sorry if my hair looks a little bit crazy. I'm on a stretch of 5 days off after my holiday, or after the holidays in retail, so I'm really doing the bare minimum in effort in this time. But today I wanted to go over what I read in the month of December, wrap up my 2021 reading, and with wrapping that up, I'm also gonna go over my least favorite reads and my favorite reads of the year. Pretty stoked to do this. Took me about an hour to go through and find everything. So I'm excited just to get it done, wrap up 2021, put a bow on it, shove it in the back of my closet, like a box of my ex-boyfriend's things, and just never look at it again, because this was kind of a rough year for me. Not reading wise though. So December was an interesting month. I thought I read less than I did because I forgot about a weird, let's call it an episode I had. And let's just jump right into it. I read, all in the span of 4 days, book 1 through 6 of the Pretty Little Liars novels. I can't tell you exactly what happened. Every year during Christmas, when I get really stressed at work, I have an identity crisis of sorts. And this year that took the form of PLL. Not sorry about it. It was a very fun experience. So book 1 through 6, I didn't really rate them. I rated them a 3 out of 5 because like it's a middling series. What can I say? I'd never read the series before, but I will die on this hill that is some of the best television I've ever seen, and not in an ironic way, in a way of like, I'm absolutely gobsmacked it went on as it did, that there was so much inappropriate relationships that were in it. Like, it's a real plethora, it's a real Pandora's box of reasons why I find that show fascinating. And none of them are the way that I think the showrunners would want, but hey, that's neither here nor there. It was still good television and I still watched it. So with those 6 out of the way, next I picked up, should have put these in order. Let me do that now. I had a bit of a thriller month / dystopian month. So I picked up, no, I didn't pick that one up. I picked up Like Me by Haley Phelan. This was a thriller of sorts, but more of an introspection with social media and obsession with image and wanting so much what someone else has. So I rated this one 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. Recently, I have deleted all of my social media, but I did get back Instagram, which is interesting, but I unfollowed everyone that I really don't know or don't speak to. So that was an interesting journey for me. But right after I did that, I found this book kicking around my work and it just sounded absolutely perfect. It's about a young model in New York City who follows another model on Instagram that also lives in the city, and she's very envious of her life, but that envy turns borderline obsession, and we see her kind of cuckoo bird that model's life. And it's really interesting, psychological thriller, maybe? I don't know if I would call it a thriller, but it was very interesting and I would definitely recommend this. It was a great way to kick off my month. Next, I read The End of Men. I rated this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. I loved the premise. The premise is basically there's a new plague and it affects like 97% or 98% of men in the world. So we start pre-plague and we just look at a couple lives that are kicking around. And then we go into the plague where basically all of men die off. And the world is left scrambling because, unfortunately, even though this is Rihanna's world, it's also a man's world. So the world is kind of left reeling on what to do, and it's kind of thrown into turmoil. And there's some really heartfelt moments of families being torn apart, even if it's indirectly about the plague. So I really, really enjoyed it. I feel like it was maybe like 60 pages too long. Like there was just some moments that really like could have used an editor's like strong hand of like, hey, don't overindulge. It's not necessary. But besides that, I really enjoyed it. Next, I read A Mouthful of Air by Amy Copeland. I feel like everybody knows what this book is about. I don't really need to go over it. I rated it 4 out of 5 stars. I would say a pretty harsh trigger warning for suicide and depression, but essentially the story takes place a couple of weeks after our main heroine has attempted to unlive herself, and we're following her journey through her mind and her life as she's reeling and really trying to cope with the fact that she is still alive. It was good. And then I read, I don't have it with me, but 56 Days, can't remember the author's name either. It was a COVID thriller, and it was fine. I rated it 3 out of 5 stars. The premise, very self-explanatory. 2 people go on a date, they like each other, they decide to live together during the worldwide shutdown because COVID has hit, and I mean, that's that. 3 out of 5. It was a middling thriller for me. And next and last for the year of 2021, I read The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. I was waiting for it to get cold before I read this because I read the guest list this year. I bought them at the same time. I enjoyed the guest list. I know a lot of people didn't, but I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed The Hunting Party. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I feel like Lucy Foley is very like traditional mystery thriller, and I like that. She's very like Agatha Christie of, you have a group of people, everyone's very much a caricature of how someone would be. Like you have a violent one or a preppy one and a smart one, and through all of them there will be a death and you have to determine who did what. I like those sorts of mystery thrillers, so I enjoyed it, and it was a great way to finish off my year. Apparently 'tis the season for killing and slashing, because that is how I spent my Christmas, was a month full of thrillers. So that is it. That's what I read in 2021. And now we're gonna go over what were my reading goals, what were my favorites, what were my least favorites. So my goal this year was to read 100 books, and I read 120. I'm pretty happy with that number. I am very goals oriented, so when I go above, I am happy with it because I do try and set pretty realistic goals. I think there was a couple of factors of like I would read 17 books in a month and then I would read 5 books the next month. So it wound up really paying off to kind of bargain for a little less than like around 8 books a month, because I wound up reading on average 10 a month. Going through the stats, I started off strong in the month of January with 14 books. I followed that up in February with 5 books. And then March brought along 9 books. Some of my favorite books were in the month of January and in the middle of summer, but we will get to that when I go over my favorite books. Oh, just when I thought I only read 9 books in March. No, that's not true. The second half of March was just on a different page. I read an additional 13 out of those. So that is definitely my strongest month, where I read over 20 novels in 1 month. But if I remember correctly, that was also the month that I got quarantined. So I was stuck in my house, couldn't leave it for 2 weeks. And that would do it, probably about a book a day. In April, I read 11 novels. In May, I read 8 in total. June, I only read 4. But a lot of them were books. They were an average of 4.5 out of 5 stars. I read 2 5 stars and 2 4 stars. In July, I read 8 novels. In August, I read 12. For the month of September, I read 8 novels again. And October, I read 13. November, I read 5. In December, I read 10. Giving us a grand total of 120. I did do that math kind of along my head as I was counting and tallying my books. So if I'm a couple short, I apologize. I think that's right though. I feel good about it. So from that, we're going to go ahead and talk about my least favorite novels because I want to end on a happy note. Because why not? I get to choose happiness. I just saw another one of my favorites that I couldn't find before. That's better. Okay, so this was a weird year of like, I read almost entirely fantasy or romance, which in and of itself is weird. I think I've spoken about it before previously. Maybe a year and a half ago, I did not read fantasy. I did not read romance. I would read contemporary fiction, usually by Owen's voices, and I would read nonfiction. So it's really a journey happening here, and I'm all right with it. But what I learned through my reading this year is I think I'm growing out of teen. I didn't really like it to begin with, but I think last year, mostly 2020, I read a lot of teen that I really fell in love with, which would be like Leigh Bardugo's Six of Crows duology. There's just some teen that I found that I felt the story transcended the less than capable writing. And that sounds really mean, but it's not meant to. The audience is for teens, so I'm more forgiving in terms of the writing when it comes to that. However, I do feel like if you read a lot of teen, it can get very irksome very quickly. And I think that's what I found myself with this year. I'm just teen, young adult fiction out. So number one on my list is Vengeance Road. I DNF'd that. I think it was a Christine Feehan novel I got from the library just on a whim. But it was a romance. It was a hard romance. I think that's what it's called, where it's like a little bit less savory topics, but I think it was weird. I do not like the kind of romance, and I know some people do, and hey ho, go for it, but I don't like the kind of romance that dances the fine line of insensitivity and what I would call emotionally abusive. And speaking of emotionally abusive, the next least favorite read of mine was Road Trip by Beth O'Leary. I hated it. There was spoiler because I feel like it's important that it's out there. I hated it specifically because of the ending reveal. Why the couple breaks up is our lead character was sexually assaulted. Her partner did not believe her and thought she was cheating. It was just gross. It was gross. There's no coming back from that. There's no redemption arc for me. Like, you're gross. You need to be thrown out in the trash, not to be recycled, to go straight to the dump. Like, I just think it was so gross. But like, some people liked it, and that's why I rated it a 2, because I know that romance is for someone. It is just not for me. Propagating some real shifty things, I think, Miss O'Leary, but that is your choice. And then not too bad. I try to keep my least favorite reads quite small. So it's really just books that I just cannot stand when I think about. And last but not least, on that same vein of teen, is These Hollow Vows by I Can't Remember, because I unhauled it as soon as it was possible. Didn't finish it, didn't like it. It was about a young woman who travels into the fae world. She has like a friend who turns out to be a fae prince. It's not a spoiler. They beat you over the head with the hints about it, and then it takes her like a full 3 pages of him saying, but it's me, for her to realize that he is a fae prince. Like, it's just her like, but no, you're my friend. And he's like, yep, I'm also a prince. And she's like, but no, you're my friend, and my friend's a human. And it was the most irksome scene I think I've ever read. It almost turned me off ever reading the word fae again. I just wanted to shake the hero, or the main heroine. She was an idiot. Like, God bless her heart. She was an idiot. And it was really obnoxious to read, to be honest. So that is that. We're going to leave those bad vibes in our rearview mirror, and we're going to turn to my favorite reads of 2021, which I have in a stack in front of me. The reason I couldn't hold up any of my least favorites is because I hated all of them so much. I unhauled them immediately, and one luckily was from the library, so didn't give out money. So I'm actually going to start this list with my honorable mentions. That would be a couple of middle grade, which I do not generally favorite just because it's middle grade. I'm not the audience for it. I still enjoy it. I like to fill my bookshelves for my future children. But realistically, they're not going to do better, perform better in my mind than something that's more skewed for my age range. But in saying that, Keepers of Velocity, it's probably one of my favorite middle grade series of all time. I read book 8 this year, Legacy. I read it when I was in quarantine. It made me so happy. I really enjoyed it. It's so cute. I can't wait for book 9 to come out. But on that same vein, an honorable mention goes to Omari and the Night Brothers. This is book 1 of a new middle grade series that I'm really enjoying. There's some great representation. It's kind of found magic of our heroine who didn't realize she held magic within her. So that's just my favorite trope. It's in both of these. Both of them are young female led, which is also important for middle grade to see. And consistently, when people are looking for a series similar to Harry Potter, I will give them Keepers of Velocity and Omari and the Night Brothers. Book 2 comes out very soon, so it's also a great one to suggest. Next on my honorable mentions would be From Blood and Ash. I feel like a lot of people would be surprised that this isn't on my favorite of the year list, just because, listen, this is my second copy of book 1 because book 1 is lost somewhere in my friend group. It's been passed around so much. I don't know who has it. It'll come back to me, or it won't. It'll have another life. I was happy to buy a second copy. But that's how much I love this series, is I've really pushed it to anyone and everyone who will listen. I reread this book once this year. I read it in January, reread it again a few months later. I reread book 1 and book 2 for the release of book 3. I also read the prequel. So like in total, I've read like 7 books, counting the rereads of this series. And still it gets an honorable mention because I'm realizing there was enough problems with this series, with book 1. There were some inconsistencies of like, I love the romance aspect of it, but upon rereading it, like it's like junk food. I was gonna say hot Cheetos, but that is one of my favorite foods. I love a takeaway, but is a takeaway going to be my favorite food if I had any choice of food? Probably not. And that's how I feel about this series. There is, upon rereading it, inconsistencies. It could use an editor so much. Book 1 has so many problems. There's some plot holes, but like, I mean general inconsistencies of like someone wearing a white shirt and then at the end of the page, it's described as light blue. Like there's just inconsistencies in these books that were irksome enough that I could not put it in my favorites. But it gets an honorable mention because I loved it dearly. My next honorable mention, I'm only not putting it as my favorites because she's my favorite author and I'm just rereading them. So I knew they would be favorites. Like, look how beloved this book is. My honorable mentions go to Emma and Pride and Prejudice because I'm doing a Jane Austen reread. I'm loving it, but I can't in good conscience put it in my favorites of the year because it's my favorites of all time. So like, of course, I should leave room for other things that I discovered this year and enjoyed this year, but I had to at least mention it. I love it so much. I'm rereading Emma as we speak, even though I just read it like 3 months ago. I'm reading it again because I watched the movie again. So then I had to reread it and it's making me want to reread Pride and Prejudice, but I have other ones to read first. I'm on Mansfield Park and I need to at some point finish that. But I love Jane Austen, and anytime I'm talking about favorites, she deserves an honorable mention. So from that, we now have 4 general fiction, poetry, contemporary, and then 3 fantasy science fiction favorites of this year, and potentially a couple favorites of all time. So let's go through it. First, for poetry, I read Ariel by Sylvia Plath this year, and I loved it. I reread it. I read it the first time, and then I reread it and started marking the living hell out of it because everything was so beautiful. Like, I literally just wrote stunning in the margins. There was just so much to unpack. It was so beautiful. And my favorite, not my favorite, but one of my new favorite quotes in poetry, I rise with my red hair and I eat men like air. Are you joking? That's amazing. So obviously that was going to be on my favorites of the year. If I put a poetry collection down and immediately have to pick it back up with the highlighter, you're doing something right. And then in the holiest of Taylor Swift years, in which we got so much Taylor Swift musical content, I of course had to reread some of these I hadn't read before, but read the poetry collection of Emily Dickinson, in which Taylor Swift famously is inspired and quotes within her Folklore Evermore season, and we loved it. We all loved it. All of us Swifties to die over. I have a lot of merch from that era. But it was a beautiful collection. I loved Emily Dickinson to begin with. I had never read her full collection of poetry, and I'm so happy that I did. Because it was just gorgeous. It was absolutely stunning to read. And I read it this summer while I was like laying in the park, or generally I tried to read this when I was outside, and it was beautiful. Would recommend. Next, I have How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents by Julia Alvarez. I absolutely loved this book. It's all marked up again. This is about a immigrant family that comes from the DR to Manhattan, and sort of the idea of becoming westernized when you come from a family of immigrants. It was gorgeous. My dad is from the DR, so of course it hits closer to home than you would hope. It's heartbreaking to read about families doing something for the betterment of their daughters, but then to see them losing their traditions in both good and bad ways. You see them become more feminist, you see them become more forward thinking than they would be able to be on the island, but it's also just really upsetting to see the family have to watch them get westernized. It was gorgeous. Julia Alvarez is one of my favorite authors, and for good reason. She scores nothing but net. And lastly, I have to put Sally Rooney, Beautiful World, Where Are You? I rated this 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it. I love books about female friendship, and I said it once, I'll say it again. Female friendship is the most romantic and dramatic love stories to be told, in my opinion, and I appreciate that Sally Rooney will linger on those, and I hope she never stops writing about them, because there's so much to explore. They're so complicated and beautiful and dynamic. I never get tired of reading about them. I'm about to lose my voice here. Okay, so now we are going to go over my 3 favorite fantasy / science fiction, whatever it is, of the year. So first on the list, I have Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is a trilogy I discovered this year. I'm just like a couple hundred pages from finishing book 3, which has not disappointed. But I have absolutely fallen in love, not just with the Farseer trilogy, but with Robin Hobb as a writer as well. For Christmas, I asked for the Live Traders trilogy. That's the Ship of Magic, Mad Ship, and I can't remember the last one. And I received it, and I'm so excited for the year of 2022 to read that trilogy and hopefully make it a tradition and just make my way through Robin Hobb's different trilogies as they all take place in the same universe. I think this one's going to surprise people, and also this is my trade paperback copy because my special editions I moved into my room and I just don't want to touch them. It has such a beautiful aesthetic going on. So forgive me, this isn't my prettier copy, but next on the list I'm actually going to put Dune. If you know me, that should be a really big surprise because I don't read science fiction very much. I don't really like science fiction. The last science fiction I enjoyed was Skyward by Brandon Sanderson, and to be honest, I think I would like most of what he writes, just because I like his writing style and how he world builds. And I've had a lot of people say that this is more fantasy than science fiction. I don't think that's true. I think this is definitely a lot of tropes of science fiction have come from here. You can really see this as a grandfather of science fiction, and what has inspired quite a lot has really ridden the backs. Like, I'm talking Star Wars, I see a lot of influence. Even something like The Wheel of Time, I see a lot of influence. But to speak on that, as a person who doesn't like science fiction, as a general rule, I adored this. I adored this, and I adored the movie adaptation. I feel like it stayed pretty true to the source material, and that was to a benefit. I think this is one of the cases where I think it's probably to the benefit if you haven't read this and you're new to science fiction, or it takes some time. Frank Herbert has a writing style that I really like, in which he doesn't really hold your hand in exposition. He will just give you information. But if that's something that's maybe not your style, I would actually recommend going to see the movie first, because the movie only deals with maybe like this much. It's part one of the book, which they're splitting into, because the book does have like a really nice finishing moment before you start part two. So they kind of piggybacked on that for the book, or for the movie adaptation. And I think it's to the benefit. If you go see it, it gives you a little bit of foundation, so you can really see the world, get more attached to the characters before you hop into the book series. I plan to read book 2 and 3 in the first half of this year. I'm really excited about it, but I absolutely loved it. And I never thought science fiction would be on my top reads of the year, but there you go. We're all changing and growing. I feel like this is going to be a surprise to no one, so I'm just going to throw it out there. My favorite book I read this year was Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. It's book 4 in the Stormlight Archive. I reread all of the Stormlight Archive this year, which I need to stop doing. It's not, oh, again, this is my paperback because my signed beautiful edition is in the room. I think that needs to be, well, although I heard the next one's not coming out until 2023 of Christmas, so maybe I will reread them. I don't know. I really love this series, but I have a friend that's also reading it, so I got to talk to her about it as she reread them, and I just had such a wonderful time. Every time you finish a book in this series, you're wondering how by the end Sanderson is going to raise the stakes, and every time he does it, every time I'm gobsmacked at his ability to write in little hints that it makes the story make sense, and it makes the reveals not feel like a cheat or the twists feel like a cheat. It feels like a natural growth within the story. So it makes every single huge mammoth tome of a book feel like it's a 300-page novel. Like, it reads so quickly. The characters are so dear to your heart, even by the end of book 1, that once you get to book 4, it's just so nail biting. And this one, we found our After the reunion and Oathbringer, where everyone comes back together, we're splintered apart in this one, but it doesn't feel like it was just for the sake of something to put us on a nice edge. It felt everything was so true to what Sanderson is building up towards, and I have my theories. I don't want to discuss them because half of me wants to be surprised. The other half of me just wants to keep them to myself. But I would heavily recommend, if you haven't read book 4 yet, I would recommend go back. I know it's upsetting, but go back, read Mistborn series 1 and 2. He has 2 trilogies out. Go back and read Warbreaker as well. And I think it will make this so much more satisfying. Or if you have read this, go read those that I just said and then come back and reread this, because I think we'll be on the same page of what we're thinking about what's gonna happen. So 30 minutes later, that was my reading year in a brief synopsis. I think next year, because hopefully COVID will be a little bit better, but we'll see. I'm looking to go to Montreal with my mother in the summer, go visit my brothers on the East Coast, and I have a lot of traveling plans that I'm excited to do, and family I would like to go see. So I'm thinking that my goals are going to be a little different for next year, but I will touch on that in my next video when I discuss my reading plans for 2022. I hope you guys all had a wonderful holiday season, New Year's, and generally just a good 2021. I know it was a rough year for a lot of people, myself included, but you know what? It's done. We're starting fresh, and I'm excited to see what this year is going to bring. And thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you next time.